As the second exhibition approaches for Indiana basketball, who could be some of those impact players this season for the Hoosiers?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Goins, with you for another episode. Today, I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for your $20 off your first purchase. Well, Indiana, as we approach the second exhibition for the Indiana Hoosiers, I want to talk about some players that could be the impact players, and maybe the biggest impact players this season for Mike Woodson and company. Plus, want to talk about why some early stress for the Hoosiers might just be a good thing, and talk about some of the comments from head coach Mike Woodson that he had in his radio show yesterday. And so, looking at this roster for Indiana basketball, we saw how this team performed in the exhibition. And we know that early on, it wasn't the most impressive basketball, right? You saw the five starters: Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renault, and Kel'el Ware, of course, out of the transfer portal. Those were the five players that started for Indiana in the exhibition against Indianapolis. And coming into the season, Mike Woodson said that there were really three key starters and three guys that he felt were solid starters. He said Johnson, Renault, and Galloway. Those were the three guys that we could pretty much bank on being in the starting five to start this season for Indiana. You would expect Mackenzie Mbako to be there, being a five-star freshman. And then you would expect, with how good Ware is and how highly rated of a recruit that he was, that he would come in and earn that starting job. And I still think he will. And I think Mackenzie Mbako will still be a starter as well. But we saw in this exhibition that those five guys, while they ended up having decent stats and playing well, much, much better in the second half, it was the guys coming off the bench like Anthony Walker and CJ Gunn and Payton Sparks and Anthony Leal and Gabe Cupps. Those guys, the second group of five that came in and played a heck of a lot better than the first five did. And we know that Mike Woodson stresses a deep bench. We know that he wants to play 9, 10, 11 guys even to get a program where it needs to be to compete down the stretch, right? When you get into March and late March and hopefully what will be an NCAA tournament bid. But when you look at guys who are going to be impact players, first of all, I want to start with the starters, right? We know that Xavier Johnson's going to be good. We've seen it already. We've seen it in the past. We know what he's going to be, and his senior leadership and experience is going to carry this team really, really far. And I think that's going to help this team that has seen adversity already in their first exhibition, that will see adversity coming up later on in the season. He will be a guy that they lean on to kind of calm everybody down, if you will, and be like, look, man, we're down by 7 on the road in Michigan or whatever it may be. How do we respond, right? Who do we go to maybe get a bucket and try to get our mojo back and get back in this thing? I look at Xavier Johnson for that role. Other guys in the starters, right? And I say starters in quotations because it's obviously not the first game yet, and things could still change. But I would expect the five guys you saw in the exhibition to probably be your starters coming up in just a couple of weeks when the season really gets going. Mackenzie Mbako has to be an impact guy. Has to be. And here's the problem, though. He's a freshman. He's a very young freshman, an inexperienced freshman. he can be a go-to guy offensively, and he's going to make some big plays for this team for Indiana. But you can't go into this season and expect him to just explode off the scene and just be a superstar, right out of the gate. And you can't expect him to come out and drop 25 points a night and just shatter all of the stat sheets every single time, and he be the guy that carries you to the NCAA tournament. Mackenzie Mbako is not going to be Trace Jackson-Davis from day one. He will be a go-to guy at times. And like I said, he's going to make some really big plays and highlight reels and Sports Center top 10 plays. But you can't rely on him to be just the it guy time in and time out until he gets better and more experience. So I'm excited for his potential. I really, really am. But I don't think Indiana can lean on him down the stretch in a big game against Auburn or a big game against Kansas or a big game against UConn or a big game in anything in the Big Ten, right? But other guys like Ware out of the transfer portal, I think you can. I absolutely think you can. Plus, you have the experience of Renault and Galloway. If that is your starting five, if that is who Mike Woodson ends up going with, they're all going to have their own role. They're all going to have to play defense. And that's one thing that we saw from the second unit in this first exhibition was they're ready to play some defense. And I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, if one of these five guys that I think will be the starter, if they don't play elite defense and they're not playing up to the standard of Mike Woodson and Indiana basketball, he is not afraid to replace these guys. I really don't think he is. It may not be for the whole season. It may not even be for multiple games in a row. But I guarantee in a non-conference game or maybe even in a weeknight conference game, if he sees somebody like Mackenzie Mbako or Ware, right? If these guys aren't guarding and playing elite defense, Mike Woodson will bench you. He will put you on the bench to prove a point. And I think it's sometimes the right way to go. So that's why I think it's important for these starters to come in and play with high energy, off the rip, and play 40 straight minutes. And that's something we're going to talk about coming up in just a little bit. But some of the guys off the bench quickly gave cups, both Anthony Walker and Leal. I'm excited about those guys. Payton Sparks is going to bring, no pun intended, he's going to bring a spark to this team. And I just love the energy I saw from these guys. And when you play with high energy, a high defensive effort, good things happen on the offensive end of the floor. That's what this second unit's going to be. And I talked about this on yesterday's show, how Indiana is hoping there is very, very little to no drop-off when you sub in 4 or 5 of these guys at a time, or if you plug in Anthony Walker and gave Cups in at the same time, or any of these 5 guys off the bench. When you plug and play, you're hoping for little to no drop-off. So, yes, those 5 guys that we saw starting are going to be elite. They're going to be impactful. But I'm excited for the guys off the bench as well, because those guys deserve it. And if they're playing harder in practice, if they're playing harder in games, especially on the defensive side of the floor, if I'm head coach Mike Woodson, I don't hesitate to put them in. I really, really don't. I know we've got a long way to go. You still have another exhibition and then your regular season opener. But for me, of the starters, I'm excited to see what Xavier Johnson does as a leader. I'm excited to see what Mackenzie Mbako does as a freshman phenom. And then guys all off the bench, like Sparks and like Cups, to come in and play their role and play it really, really well. And I think that's what Indiana's going to need this year at times to get them through what is a tough Big Ten schedule. We'll talk about some of those early struggles that Indiana has had with that exhibition game and how you can avoid that and why it may be a good thing that Indiana kind of saw a little resistance and a little muddy track, if you will, in the first half of that exhibition game. We'll talk about that coming up in just a minute. But first, want to tell you about Game Time, who is the sponsor of today's show. When you're buying tickets for concerts and athletic events and sporting events, right, it can be such a hassle. It really can. It can be annoying. There's so many different sites you can use. You don't know if you're getting legitimate tickets or not. You have all the hidden fees. You can't see where you're sitting. It's just a disaster. And there's really only one place that you should go, because you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to that big event. And you shouldn't have to worry when all you're trying to do is go and have a good time, right? You just want to buy your tickets and go to the event and not worry about it anymore. And Game Time is the place to go with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, which is my favorite part, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. All the certain events coming up. I mean, with Indiana basketball right around the corner, you still have Indiana football in season with a couple of more home games left. You have opportunities to go to the Game Time app, go to these games using Game Time. Last minute tickets, flash deals, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Whether you're there in Bloomington or whether you're out somewhere in the country, Game Time is where you need to get your tickets. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you only know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And the all-in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal without the hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, we know that Indiana saw a little adversity in their first exhibition game, but I'm okay with it. And here's why. Early on in a season, and I know, again, it's still an exhibition, right? It is still not even the first game of the regular season, but it took a passionate halftime speech from head coach Mike Woodson to kind of get his team motivated, right? And to get his team really up to play, especially from his starters, against Indianapolis. But I'm okay with a little adversity, and I'm okay if this even carries over into the regular season a little bit to get this thing started, because you basically have a chance, if you're Mike Woodson, to let your starters know, like, hey, you've got to show up and play every single night. Because of the reasons we just talked about a little bit ago, there are 5 or 6 guys behind you that are willing to play, that are willing to do what it takes on the defensive end of the floor and will hustle down and back every single time. And I'm not saying the starters don't do that, and the potential starters, I should say. I'm not saying they don't do that. But I think some of this slow start adversity, if they continue to play like this, will give Mike Woodson an opportunity to flex his bench a little bit. And when you have guys behind you on the bench that play hard and do the things the right way, it a lot of times pushes those starters even more and makes them even better, which makes the team better overall, which is, of course, what we all want for Indiana. But I think if you continue to see this in the next exhibition for Indiana, and you see this through these first non-conference games in the first couple of weeks of the season, if you continue to see this, I think it gives the team an opportunity to understand, okay, we're not perfect, right? We are beatable as a basketball team right now, especially when you start going up against some of the big-time Power 5 teams you're going to be playing in non-conference schedule. And it just sort of reminds them, like, hey, we have to get better, right? It's the beginning of the season. We've been playing ourselves the entire offseason. We have things to get better at and work on, and that's what I believe the non-conference schedule is really, really about. You want to be hitting your stride when you get in to Big Ten play. You use games in non-conference schedule to get better, work on certain things. And even these exhibitions, you can play whatever rotations you want because it doesn't really matter. I just think that it really does help. And I'm not saying I want to see Indiana struggle for the next 3 weeks, not by any means. But I think early adversity in exhibitions, in early season games. It gives this team a chance to learn who they are, learn their strengths, learn their weaknesses, and maybe try to fix it, whether it be shooting layups and free throws or defensive effort or effort in transition offensively and defensively. You can learn those types of things when a team like Indianapolis comes out and sort of punches you in the mouth, right? You have a chance to say, oh, wow, maybe we're not as good as we thought we were. And maybe we do have to play a little harder. Even though we've got some talent, we're going to have to play hard this season to compete in the Big Ten. And I think that's going to be it's going to have to be their motivation. They've got the talent. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about Indiana's talent, and I don't think a lot of you are either. But you're going to have to play hard. And so situations like we saw on Sunday against Indianapolis, where you look up late first half and Indiana's losing, and you're like, oh, goodness, what's going on? That's okay. And even if that happens in game one against Florida Gulf Coast, let's say Indiana's down at the half. Good. Let's see what you got. Let's see what you're made of. Let's see what Xavier Johnson does as a leader. Let's see what some of these transfer portal guys have brought with them from former schools and former locations and former coaches and former playing time. That's exciting to me. I love the non-conference part of a basketball season where you really see a team go through some struggles, grow, get better. You learn, everybody learns who they are, and the team learns who they are, and they learn who they go to at certain times, and they figure out what they have to do in certain situations. And I just love that part of college basketball where it's truly like no other sport. And I think Indiana is going to have some growing pains between the experience that they have and the youth that they've brought in, mixed with the new faces of the transfer portal. Yeah, you're going to have some growing pains for a little bit. But once they figure those out, hopefully by Big Ten play, this is going to be a really, really good basketball team. And so you may get blown out by Kansas. You may get blown out by Auburn. May get blown out by UConn. You may play some close games early in non-conference schedule. Heck, you may play close games late in December. You may play close games in some of those conference games early because the Big Ten is scheduled a little bit different than some of the other conferences where you're going to see some Big Ten teams early. And Indiana may not play all that great in those. But I think that will make this team better as long as they learn and get better from those types of games. Where the problems start coming in is if you have those struggles and you have those games and Indiana's not getting better. Then you look at head coach Mike Woodson, right? Then you look at some of those older leaders on this team and you're like, okay, we're seeing the same problems, December 1, and we're still seeing them January 1? That's an issue, right? If you're still seeing the same problems over and over and over again, then that's when you have issues. I don't expect that to happen long term. I think Indiana can use games like Indianapolis to get better, but it's just the first exhibition. I expect this team to play a lot better moving forward and just learn who you are. And that's what's exciting to me about college basketball. But for this Indiana team in particular, adversity is not going to be a bad thing, folks. They need it. They're going to need it. And once they get through it, once they get through some of those growing pains, man, it's going to be a really, really good team. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I'm excited to be along for the ride, and I hope you are as well. Well, before we move on, want to remind you that Locked On, and with college football season, they have our Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On College YouTube channel, including Locked On Hoosiers. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, which are right around the corner, and go in-depth like only Locked On can during insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. And coming up, Mike Woodson had his radio show appearance this week. We'll talk about some of the comments that he had about the exhibition game, about the team, and kind of looking ahead to the next exhibition game for Indiana basketball. But before we do that, want to tell you about our show sponsor today, FanDuel. As the NFL season is really getting into the deepness of it, right? We're right in the heart of the NFL season. You can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbooks. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. Let me say that again. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150. All you got to do is bet on your team to win. That's pretty awesome. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. I have it. I use it. It's super easy, super simple, wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and a whole lot more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Well, Mike Woodson had his weekly radio show this week and had some interesting comments about this Indiana team, about just the first scrimmage, right? Or the first exhibition, I should say. And I want to read you some of his comments and kind of react to what he had to say. Because so far in this offseason, and as we get closer to the start of the season, he's had some interesting things to say. Not in a bad way, by any means. Not a bad way. But just interested to what he has to say about this team. He talked about his solid starters, right, with Renaud, Galloway, and Johnson, and how he felt really, really confident with those three guys. And we saw them start in the first exhibition. Talked about Anthony Walker and Payton Spark, how bringing those guys in is really going to boost this team. But he also talked about how they just have to gel a little bit, and that's going to take some time. He talked about the summer and how a lot of them stuck around. A lot of the guys on the team stuck around this year. And instead of going home, you're working out, you're practicing, you're hanging out. That helps team bonding and chemistry, just hanging out together, right? Playing video games, going to eat dinner, doing whatever it is that college kids like to do in the summer. College athletes, right? Not out doing anything dumb, just out hanging out, being together. That builds chemistry. And when you become friends with these guys, you want to be around them more. And you just click, right? When you're all on the same page, it really seems like that it helps. And so that's good to hear that a lot of these guys stuck around. Here's what I've been talking about this whole show, and Mike Woodson said something about it in his radio show. He said in scrimmages, Indiana's white team, so the role players and the reserves, really, really pushed the red team, the starters, all summer and all fall practice. Doesn't that fall right in line with what we've been talking about? How the starters, you have a good idea who they're going to be, but if they don't play to their potential and they don't show up day in, day out, night in, night out, game in, game out, there are plenty of guys behind them that are more than happy to take that starting role for them. And that's why I think you could see a lot of rotation early on from this Indiana basketball team, because maybe somebody just doesn't have it. And maybe one of these guys from the portal doesn't become what you thought he was. Or I would hate this, but what if Mackenzie Mbako doesn't play to his level or his potential yet, right? Those are all possibilities. And you could take this one of two ways, that the reserves are pushing the starters in practice and scrimmages. You could take this as, oh, wow, starters need to get better because the bench is really keeping it close. Or you could take it as, wow, Indiana's bench is really good and they're going to have some depth, and that's going to help them compete in the Big Ten. That's the way I'm leaning. I'm going to lean on the side of Indiana should be thankful that they have a bench that's going to compete, and there's going to not to be a whole lot of drop off, you hope. Now, does that mean the starters have to get better? Yeah, absolutely. But I look at this as the bench is going to be hopefully one of the best in the Big Ten, which helps you in big games down the stretch. Some of the comments Mike Woodson had about the exhibition, he said, quote, "I wasn't excited in the first half." Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Said he didn't think they competed in the first half. miscues on defense, lacks of execution on offense. He said the second unit, they were great all game is what he said. It's just a lot of the things that we've talked about. Here's some specific comments he had about players. Said Gabe Cupps was so anxious going into the game that he, quote, probably wanted to play the night before if he could have. Woodson says he, quote, wasn't shocked with how well Cupps played given his practice performance. That's great to hear. Didn't get a chance to play Xavier Johnson, Gabe Cupps, and Trey Galloway together for more than 2 minutes. Wants to give that lineup combo more of a run Friday against Marion. That could be a really dangerous lineup. That really could. You're talking about some firepower, scoring ability, and just basketball IQ with those three guys. And if they're on the floor at the same time, I know it's going to be tough. It is. But man, if you could find a way to get them 8 or 10 minutes on the floor together each and every game, that's going to be huge. That would be really, really big, and find a way to make it work. You don't want to force it, right? You don't want to force it by any means, but I think that would be a lot of fun to try to get that on the floor. Woodson talks about the 28 fast break points, says, quote, probably the most that we've had since I've been here. I love that, because here's the thing. If early on you're having problems offensively in a half-court set, or if you're having problems defensively guarding in a half-court set, getting fast break points is a perfect way to offset those. You don't have to worry about setting up offensively, and if you're getting steals and turnovers, get out and run, right? Get out and run, get your points, and get back on defense. Overall, it seems like Mike Woodson, head coach for Indiana, is maybe not pleased, but I don't think he's overly disappointed. But again, it's only one game, right? It's the first exhibition. You better believe he was disappointed after that first half. And he will be looking to see how Indiana comes out against Marion, if they come out with more energy, come out with better focus, better execution on both ends of the floor. And if it is the same way on Friday, which I don't think it will be, if it's the same way, then yeah, he's going to have some concern. And I'm sure a lot of you will also, and so will I. But I think he is pleased with his talent level. I think he's pleased with the freshmen. I think he's pleased with the transfer portal additions. He has a good balance, but he knows there's work to be done. And if Indiana can find a way to just put everything together, and again, it's going to take some time, but if Indiana can find a way to put it together at the start of this season, maybe beat somebody you're not supposed to in non-conference play, take down one of those 3 big teams that you have on the schedule, and start winning some early Big Ten games, everything's going to be fine. And I'm curious to see what Mike Woodson's tone is early on when these games are real and start mattering, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way about exhibitions, but they don't go on your record, right? You can lose, people might flip out, but it doesn't mean anything. I'm curious on how Mike Woodson sounds and what he says about this team, if there are early season struggles, and how he might try to limit expectations with his comments before this team can really reach their potential. That is it for today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers. I appreciate you tuning in and making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Be sure you follow me on Twitter at Goins2Jacob. That's Goins, the number 2, and Jacob. Follow the Locked On Hoosiers Twitter as well. Just search Locked On Hoosiers, or the tag is LO_Hoosiers. If you're on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Turn those notifications on. The video post every day at 7 a.m. Audio at 3 a.m. All of that is Eastern time. Be sure you check it out each and every day. We will continue talking Indiana basketball, previewing the exhibition coming up on Friday as the regular season approaches for Indiana basketball. Until tomorrow, Hoosier fans, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.